Hey, it looks like I got this question recently regarding a game with email communication. I'm going to read the message to you now, but as I go through it, I'd love for you to think in your head if there's any advice you might give to this person, particularly any games which may interface with the kind of design that it seems this person's leaning towards. So the question goes, "Hey Matthew, sorry for the cold email. Wanted to reach out. Alright, so I'm helping my teenage son with a game design challenge. Now, he doesn't have a computer science teacher at his school. I feel like he has a pretty good idea for a game, and I'm looking into the best ways to make it happen. It's not complicated, but it could be a little tricky. Alright, so here's the idea. It's a game where you play it when you're sad. When you start the game, it sends you a text or an email to your friend that invites them to join in the game. The game itself is just a little melee in which the player defeats a monster, but is much easier to defeat with the help of a friend. That's it. The main concept is based on the fact that it's hard to reach out to friends when one is depressed or feeling sad, but in this model, all one has to do is press a button and a friend comes to help. In this case, slay a symbolic monster. So when the start button is pressed, it should also trigger an email to the friend in which there is a link, so the friend can easily join the game in progress. Just watched through one of your videos. It seems that it's possible. I know you don't know us, but do you have any ideas? Is this difficult or is it easy? He can make an easier idea, but I think this is something special here, and I want to ask if we can make it happen. Thanks in advance, John. Okay. Well, it's certainly been said before that there are some games that are easier to make than others. And when we think about the hardest game to make in this industry, it's usually the MMORPG. That, for hands down, it always wins the competition of what's the most hard. And this is the game where you have a whole bunch of people playing on the game at once. A multiplayer game, in essence. And as a design challenge, having multiple players at any game that has more than one person, that is almost always going to be a little bit harder, especially from an engineering standpoint. In some cases, design, it's a little bit easier because you have less conflict that you need to insert. A lot of people will make conflict on their own. But in this case, I think there's a significant engineering challenge that would come with what you're talking about here. So let's talk about it. You want to make a game, or you want to help your son make a game where there's going to be some sort of lobby that they would start. This is basically, it's a term for an online room where they would join. Then they would have to send an email or some other way to contact their friend, and then their friend would join the room with them, join the lobby with them. Okay, so is this easy to do? No, it's not easy to do. It's complicated, especially if you're trying to do it yourself, which I definitely don't think you should do. In terms of like coding all this from scratch, there's a lot of networking code available, particularly if you're using an engine like Unity. I saw you watching my Unity video. Unity has a lot of really great resources for networking and stuff like that. But before I talk about that approach to the problem, I would take a huge step back. Never would I suggest to one of my students to make their first game a multiplayer game. Having more than one person communicating over the internet, or even if it's a local network, that's really hard. That's not easy. And in terms of programming, that's one of the harder things. So if you've got this, you said your son was a teenager, maybe he hasn't done programming before, that's not an easy subject to approach first. I think, but one of the things I love to encourage my students to do is when they're designing games is to start with a simple idea and then build on top of it. And it's often the case that, especially when you're working with students, they can get inspired by some early progress. And if we can make something that's small, but very doable first, then we can, as his experience grows, and as maybe your desire for the project grows, if you want to contribute more, you can add that extra layer. So what I'm thinking about here is, first of all, I want to pause and say, doesn't have to be a video game, right? That's my first idea. I've seen this sort of idea happen with a chain letter, right? Like manila envelopes. I know a lot of people don't send those anymore, but it certainly reminds me of some of these ARG games where you could send a literal letter to a friend, or maybe a chain text message or something like that. Maybe there's a medium for this sentiment for this game in something other than a computer game, right? So I would really explore that route, because it never has to be a video game. And I think often we start with the assumption that it has to be an app or it has to be a video game. That's often not the case, and especially if we're working with somebody who's never coded before or never had a computer science teacher, it might be a worthwhile idea to pursue something that doesn't require coding. So you might want to think about a chain letter or a chain text message or something like that. Or maybe a Facebook group or Facebook post, I don't know, something. So there's a lot of other options that we could do here. So let's say we want to make it a video game. The next thing I would say is, so we're talking about multiplayer games, right? There's two kinds of multiplayer games. The first is, I forget the word offhand, but it's passive and active. So an active multiplayer game is a game like Clash Royale, is a game like 8-Ball Pool, where you're in the same room at the same time. You see your opponent or a teammate complete an action, and then you react immediately. It's called live. It's a live game. There's another way to make a multiplayer game, which is much easier, and it's passive in that sense. It's sort of like when people will do, like, they have this on chess.com, for example. You might complete a move, and then your opponent will then have their turn to play, and they might complete a move in their own time. That might be a day later, it might be a week later. You know, they spread it out in a sense. And you are never Clash of Clans also does this, right? Very popular game. Tribal Wars did this. It's a game where you don't have to worry about lobbying. You can just like do something, and then it gets saved to like some database online, and then the next person goes. So you never need to be in the room at the same time. That is way easier a networking challenge for you to take on. So it might be something for you to consider there, right? So again, I'm just trying to present you with some gates, because the less you have to walk through, the easier this is going to be to do. What about a single player game? You know, you've got a really great sentiment here, which is that, hey, I'm sad, I want to work on this thing. What if somebody comes to help me? What if, you know, it could start out as like, maybe a robot comes to help you, a little AI. So you can create a simple game where you go and you fight a monster. I mean, you should definitely start with that. This project very, very cleanly would scope to like, first thing is you go in a room and you fight a monster. Just make that work. That's the easiest, simplest part of the problem. The MVP, you might say, or the prototype. And after you can go into the room and fight the monster, maybe you could look into something like, if your friend has also, if you fight a monster, then you can add a friend to your friends list. And then whenever one of your friends fights a monster, within an hour of you fighting a monster, your attacks are 2 times speed or something like that. So you see what I've done there? It's like you could both play the game separately, but it's benefiting each other, because maybe he gives you a little boost because he's on your friends list and he's recently beaten a monster. And then we don't have to worry about the very difficult problem, which is having them in the same room and lobbying and all that stuff. So I would explore that option as well. So the way that you might do that is you'd first create you could create a Unity game or some other kind of game where you just go and fight the monster. See if you could get that. It may pose a greater challenge than you anticipate. And if you can complete that, I mean, that could be its own game in itself, right? Oh, I completed the monster. That makes me feel accomplished. That's awesome. Well, if you could do that, then there's probably an opportunity for you to now create a friends list. There's a lot of great resources to do that. I think PlayFab might have a good resource online, or you could do really anywhere, any place that you could put up data, right? So I have a video on my YouTube channel where you could just put up data on like a Google Sheet and read that from Unity if you want to keep it real simple. Or you can use a dedicated database, like something hosted on Amazon's AWS or Microsoft's Azure or something like that. It doesn't matter where it is. You just put some data up there that says, hey, this is my friend. And then, you know, when your friend makes the attack and he defeats the monster, he could check that list and say, hey, is anybody my friend? And if somebody is my friend, then, oh, I get bonuses on my attacks. So that's a very nice way for you to do a very passive, latent system. So that would be the combat aspect. And then the notification aspect, well, there's a few ways to do that. In the video game industry, it certainly depends on the platform. But in terms of mobile, we have push notifications. Now, usually that's going to be a third-party service to integrate on that, because while Unity does provide a default implementation for you to send a push notification for yourself. So for example, you can say, hey, when this user closes the app, notify them in an hour that their package is ready for opening, right? You could do that. What you cannot do by default in Unity is say, hey, when I log into my game, tell everybody on my friends list that I just logged in, right? That would be that's a push notification rather than like a latent notification. It's a push in a true sense that like you're deciding to send the message to them rather than scheduling it. I would say that maybe that's a push notification versus a scheduled notification. So a push notification, you would probably need a third-party library for that. And there's a lot of great options, all of which are probably paid. And you could just Google push notification Unity, right? And that would be a challenge for you to wait on until you already have completed the simple thing where you just do a solo mode, right? So do the solo mode, and then you can worry about push notifications. And I do lean towards that because the response time on a push notification is pretty quick. Whereas if somebody sends me an email, I mean, just from personal experience, I might not respond to an email until a day or so later, and I certainly might not see it for a few hours. A text message can be a little bit more fast, but not as fast. And yes, there's certainly ways that you could do a text. You could, for example, generate a code, which they can then copy and put into just their basic SMS text app. And then they could text their friend that code, and then if the friend inputs that code, well, hey, you know what? You just got a boost from your friend, and you'll give your friend a boost or something like that. So you can network that as well. But I think if you wanted to do a fully integrated system, push notification makes a little bit more sense because a text or an email would require you to leave the app, which can be that could be a little bit of negative traction, I think, for the user. So those are some ideas. Now, if you want to talk about live networking, yeah, there's a ton of options there, but it is a little bit more challenging. So there's some really so Unity does have a in-the-box solution called UNet, but I think everybody pretty much agrees it's not very good. So the go-to right now would probably be Photon, which is goes under the name PUN. That's P-U-N, Photon Unity Networking, and you could Google that, and I think it's free as long as you have less than 60 people or something like that on at a single time. So for your son's app, I mean, unless this thing catches on, in which case you could scale it very easily. You know, even if it's just for among his friends at first, it'd be completely free to set up. And what that would involve is you'd create a lobbying system, and there's a lot of great tutorials on Photon and Unity. And you would have, basically, you'd enter a lobby, you send a push notification out to your buddies, say, hey, join me. And then if one of them joins you, then you can create an instanced room where you can then go fight the monster or something like that. I would say, though, it would be pretty depressing if I was depressed, I went onto the app, I tried to match with some buddies, and then nobody responded to me, right? And I'm all alone fighting this boss. That might suck. So that might be worse. So I might consider exploring the idea of if I send out the notification and nobody joins my lobby, maybe I can have some bots join me, or an artificial intelligence that seems like it's a human player. This is really common, where a lot of IO games will have bots that look like players, so they're kind of pretending they're people, but they're not really. And they'll kind of help you fight play, right? Similar to how in the video game Fortnite, whenever you do your first battle royale, you're in a lobby completely full of bots. So it's pretty much guaranteed you're going to win your first battle. Or at least they keep doing that until you do, to make sure that everybody gets at least one big win, so they feel accomplished before they send them out versing real players, right? So there's a lot of techniques there that can help people feel less alone, and I'd encourage you to check that out. And then I guess just in general, for a design sense, you should definitely check out the work of Genova Chen. Genova Chen of That Game Studio has done a lot of work in this field. Journey and Flower are some of his games on PlayStation. I think all of his games are PlayStation exclusive, but he did some work prior to that as a student. And his work is really, it goes really deep on emotional storytelling and this idea of video games as an empathic medium. So that would be a great place for you to research further explorations into this topic if you want to, refine or bring the design through another set of lenses, maybe another perspective it might help you gain. So that's all my thoughts right now for your game, John and Son. Good luck, and let me know how it goes. All right, catch you later. And if anybody else has questions, please just send me an email, or you could even leave me a comment on this YouTube video. My email address is matthewxventures@gmail.com. Thanks.